Okay. So 8th grade is kind of all about just taking concepts that you already know and just giving new names to them, right? Like you learned last year constant of proportionality, right? You know what that means? Constant rate of change. Well, this year we're going to call it slope. Or you may have actually called it slope last year too, right? So it's just giving a new name to things. So when you make a little chart and you put an X and a Y there, we're going to refer to X from now on, in Unit 3 at least, as the domain. And the Y is going to be considered the range. Have you heard those two words, domain and range? Now, you may have heard the word range. This is not the range that you are thinking. This is not, bless you, take the highest minus the lowest. Like the range in scores or the range in ages this year. The range in age in this class is probably real tight because we're all in the same grade, right? Maybe 3 years, 2 years difference. It's not that range. Okay? You may also have heard X referred to as the input sometimes. And if X is the input, then what's Y? Output. Let me give you an example of what we mean by that, because you're going to need to know this unit also. The way I explain input, output for the first time with my 7th graders, anybody ever been to the airport where you had to like check your stuff at security and you put it in this little thing and it goes through this little machine and it's x-rayed in there? Anybody? Or like think of a grocery belt. It just goes on there. So if I have X equaling 5 and I'm inputting, because X is my input, 5, and when it gets inside this secret magical box that nobody can see except if you have the x-ray machine, and this is what's inside there, if I input X into X, what gets outputted? 15, right? Okay, so when I input X, 3 times X is Y is outputted. Okay, so I want you to kind of picture that little input-output machine. So sometimes X is referred to that, and Y is always going to be your output. But for right now, I want to focus on domain and range. There's really not much teaching to do with this because I'm just telling you that, okay, the domain, I'm going to say domain instead of X from now on. So if I have like 3, actually let's go back to this. If I were to say, okay, you identified if it's a function, now identify the domain and range. Watch what you're going to do. After writing the word no, you're going to write D equals, R equals, and because we're talking about a set of numbers, there's that set notation, right? Just like when we had inequalities, like your set could be a certain number of numbers. So general rule is to put them in numerical order. So my domain is my X. You know what? Think alphabetical order. D, R, doctor, whatever. X comes before Y. D comes before R. So your domain is your X. So I'm going to say, well, I got an 11. Here's the only thing that you may get confused on. I have 2 12s. But the domain, when you're listing it, doesn't care how many there are. They're just asking you, is 11 included in this table anywhere? Yeah. Is 12 included? Yeah. I don't care how many times. It's just there. Then 13 is there. Then 14 is there. And should I do ... No, because this situation, the domain, does not include 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds forever and ever and ever. It ends at 14-year-olds. So the domain is 11, 12, 13, and 14. Got it? Now list the range. The range is 51. Remember, it's not the highest minus the lowest. You're listing, then you have a 55, then you have a 58, and then you have a 60. So what if I have 2 of them? 60's there. It's accounted for. I don't care how many times. So this brings up a good point. Do you think, if I'm asking you, like I'm going to today, to identify the domain, or identify whether it's a function, then identify the domain and range, where do you think is best to identify whether or not it's a function from? From the original table or from your listed domain? Think about that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, the 60 doesn't matter. It's the D, but yeah, I know what you meant. She said, you don't ever want to look at your list because there were 2 12s, but you don't include repeats, do you? which means don't ever write your domain out and then use this to decide whether or not it's a function. Use the original data you were given. Decide on your yes or no, put no, and then write your domain. Understand? Okay? So your goal is the same for this. Domain and range from a table, points, and a graph. So are you okay with finding the domain from a table like we just did? Yeah. Let's go back to these points right here. I'll just give you some points. Let's say, I don't know where they went. Yeah, here they are. Okay, so not including this. What's your domain? I mean, you could even color code if you want. You could say your domain is 0, 2, 3, and 8. And you would literally just write it like that. You would say your domain is 0, 2, 3, and 8. Your range then would be what? 1, 7, and how many times do I need to write that 9? Just once. So your range would be a 1, a 7, and a 9. Got it? That's it. Okay, so you're kind of doing 6 things today, and I have a couple minutes because we're not going to be able to get to this. Finding the domain and range from a table is tricky, and it requires more time than I have, but I'll just kind of get you thinking about it. So let's say this is age and height, and I go like this. Okay? Well, I want you to think about this. It's only quadrant 1, which means it's the only positive quadrant. This is where your brain, your thinking skills are going to come in here. It doesn't include quadrant 2, 3, or 4. And what does 2, 3, and 4 all have in common? Negatives. So I'm not talking about any negative y values. And I also don't want any negative x values. So watch what I could write for my domain. Here's what I'm going to say. What did I use? Blue for domain. So take your line and follow it to your x. This is your x-axis. So here, follow it down. Follow it down. So what are all the values that your domain can be? And see how that's an arrow? Does everybody agree with that? Your domain means what numbers can x possibly be on this? It could be all numbers greater than 0, greater than or equal to. That's what your domain can be. So your range is going to be, because if this is your range, which is your y, then take the line and follow it over this way. So what are all the values that your range could be? All values greater than or equal to 0. That's that. Okay? We're gonna talk about this more tomorrow, but I want to get you thinking a little bit here. Okay. What if this is 8, this is 3, and this is 10? Okay. This is a little different. So what do you think all of your, remember, this is your domain. So follow this down, follow this down, follow this down. What could my domain be? It could be what? This is where it starts to get, you know the numbers that it can be? It could be 0 all the way up to 8, but then it stops, right? What could your range be? I know that you know it, but it's like, how do you write it? And you want to know how you're going to learn tomorrow? Your range can be, it has to be, here's your 3, here's your 10. It has to be less than or equal to 10, but greater than or equal to 3. You see that? You recognize that, don't you? So your range is going to be written like this. So the hardest part of all of this is being able to tell your domain and your range